The first thing I saw was my mother's hand, blue-white and shaking, pressed flat against my front door like a prayer that wouldn't be answered. The second thing I saw was my father, slumped on the porch bench beneath the dead porch light, a thin wool cap tugged over his ears, his lips the color of bruised plums. His breath came in fragile mist that vanished as soon as it rose. And the third thing I saw was the gold glow pouring from my own living room windows, music thumping, laughter spilling into the night, and silhouettes of strangers raising glasses under my chandelier. My house, my name on the deed, my keys on my ring, and my parents locked outside. Dad. I dropped the grocery bags. Apples rolled into the hedges. A carton of eggs burst like a quiet tragedy on the steps. I yanked my scarf from my neck and wrapped it around him, my fingers fumbling with frozen fabric. Mom, what happened? Why didn't you call? We did, she whispered, chattering teeth turning her words into gravel. You were in the dentist. Your voicemail. I had been. A late appointment, then a quick stop for soup and bread because the forecast said the cold front would bite hard tonight. I had planned to surprise them with hot dinner. Instead, the surprise was this. My mother's eyes lifted to mine. They changed the locks, Clarita. The word they scraped across my ribs like a blade. I didn't need to ask who. The laughing silhouettes in my living room made it obvious. My in-laws. I pressed my palm to the doorbell, hard enough to hurt. Inside, the chimes sang its cheerful little lie. I rang again, and again. I pounded the door with the side of my fist until the wood shuddered. The music swelled louder. Maya, my father rasped. Please, inside. I spun, crossed the porch in 3 strides, and shouldered the door like a battering ram. It didn't budge. A new deadbolt gleamed above the old one, bright brass, smug as a lock can be. My keys dangled uselessly in my other hand. A burst of laughter rose from the living room. My living room. I could picture it without seeing. The champagne tower, the charcuterie spread I paid for last time, as a gesture. The tray of canapes no one in this family could pronounce, but everyone pretended to love. And at the center of it all, my mother-in-law, Livia, with a flute of bubbles and a smile that could curdle cream. My father-in-law, Arturo, booming to his guests about family, as if he hadn't just shoved mine into the dark. I jabbed my finger on the Ring doorbell camera. Open. The door. A face filled the lens. My sister-in-law, Bianca, the one who never learned the difference between frankness and cruelty. She blinked into the fisheye, then smiled, a slow curl. Oh, Maya, you're early. Early for what? I hissed. This is my home. She tilted her head. Well, technically, tonight's a private event. Private. I stepped closer. My parents are outside in 20-degree wind. Open this door, or I'm calling the police. Her lashes fluttered. Fake sweet. No need to be dramatic. We changed the locks for security. Arturo said there's been porch theft in the neighborhood. You understand. My father exhaled a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. I heard the slip of his breath, and something inside me crackled like ice underfoot. Where is Luca? I asked low. My husband, the man who promised to choose me, to protect what we built together. Put him on. Bianca's smile widened. He's busy greeting guests. Family comes first, you know. I felt the words hit like a slap. I watched my mother's breath fog the air and dissolve. Final time, I said, each syllable carved from stone. Open the door. Bianca's eyes glittered. Call first next time. The camera went black. I stared at my own face reflected in the dark glass. Behind me, my mother rubbed her hands together, trying to coax blood back into them. My father had stopped shivering, and that terrified me more than anything. Cold steals the quake before it steals the breath. I pulled my phone, thumbed 911. Emergency services. My elderly parents have been locked outside my home, I said, voice steadier than my hands. There are people inside who changed the locks without permission. We need medical and police. As I gave the address, the front door cracked an inch. Warmth rushed out in a mocking sigh. Arturo filled the gap, tuxedo collar open, throat flushed with wine and power. He smelled like cologne and contempt. "Maya," he boomed, like he was greeting a waiter who'd arrived late. "We didn't expect you." "I noticed," I said. He looked past me at my father, eyebrow arching. "Your father should have called ahead. The caterers are using the kitchen entrance." "The caterers?" I repeated it because disbelief wouldn't fit in my mouth. Livia slid in beside him, bare shoulders gleaming, diamonds catching my porch light. "Darling, you overreact," she cooed. "We were only keeping the house safe." Luca agreed. "Then where is he?" "Busy," she said a little too quickly. I planted my palm on the door, pushed. Arturo didn't move. Neither did the door. "Move. They're freezing." "Just a moment," Livia began. Sirens wailed down the block. Ambulance and squad. A duet that never sounded like salvation until it was yours. Arturo's smile faltered. I stepped forward, voice dropping to the register I save for negotiations in boardrooms when men pretend not to hear. "Open this door, or they watch you refuse emergency services on camera." Behind me, tires hissed against curb ice. Paramedics climbed the steps fast. "Who's the patient?" "My father," I said, and the steadiness fled. "Please." They wrapped him in a foil blanket that whispered like silver leaves, took his pulse, asked questions I answered from the part of my brain that still knew how to function. Hypothermia, early signs, warm fluids, transport recommended. As they worked, Luca finally appeared behind his parents, shirt collar crooked, eyes bright and wet, not with tears, with gin. He took in the scene, my parents, the medics, the officers climbing the steps, and winced like the light hurt his eyes. "Maya," he said, low, conciliatory, the tone he used when he wanted something. "This is unfortunate." I looked at my husband across the threshold of my own home, and something finished breaking. "Unfortunate," I repeated softly. "That's the word you're going with." He reached for the deadbolt. "Let's talk inside." The officer beside the paramedic stepped between us. "Ma'am, do you consent to these individuals being in your home?" I met Luca's gaze, then Livia's, then Arturo's. I let the silence grow teeth. "No," I said. "I don't." The officer nodded. "Then we'll need everyone who isn't the homeowner to step outside." The party music faltered, stuttered, died. In the cold porch light, diamonds looked like ice and my in-laws looked very small. As they shuffled back, I turned to the paramedics. "Take my father. I'll follow." Then I faced Luca one last time. "When I come back," I said, "this house will be empty." He opened his mouth, an apology, a plea, a lie, I'll never know. I closed the door. Cut to siren lights across glass. Smashed a title. They changed my locks. I changed their lives. People always ask how a love story curdles into a horror story. I'll tell you, it doesn't happen with fireworks. It happens with whispers, with small favors, with lines crossed so gently you don't feel the bruise until you can't move. I met Luca at a tech networking event downtown Denver. He wasn't the loudest man in the room, but he had this way of looking at you like you were the only one there. I was working as a project manager, juggling impossible deadlines. He was a consultant, charming, full of stories about European vacations and wine tastings. He asked me to dinner that night, and for once, I said yes. Within a year, we were married. My parents cried at the wedding, not because they disliked him. On the contrary, they thought I'd found stability, but because I was their only child, and they knew I was stepping into a new world, one they couldn't protect me from. They weren't wrong. Luca's parents, Arturo and Livia, were another story. Arturo was a retired businessman, the kind who still barked orders at waiters. Livia was polished, always polished, with a diamond smile that never touched her eyes. From the start, they made it clear, in their family they led. I thought it was cultural difference. I excused the comments, the controlling tone. "They just want to feel included," Luca would say when I bristled at their constant involvement. But inclusion blurred into intrusion faster than I could stop it. When we bought the house that later went up in flames of betrayal, They insisted on helping with the down payment. I resisted. I'd saved enough. But Lucas said it would mean a lot to them. So they helped. And from that day on, they called it their house. Oh, we chose well, didn't we? Livia would say to her bridge friends, as though she'd signed the deed. Don't forget to maintain the gutters, Maya. Arturo would remind me, like a landlord checking in. I laughed it off. That's what I did back then. Laughed it off. It didn't stop there. Arturo had a spare key. Livia had another. And somehow, Bianca, Luca's younger sister, had one too. I'd come home from work and find them rearranging furniture, critiquing my choice of curtains, replacing my mother's soup pot with some imported brand they liked better. I remember once finding Livia in my closet. My closet. She was holding up one of my dresses, lips pursed. "This shade of red is too loud for your complexion," she said smoothly. I should have thrown her out. I should have demanded every key back. But I didn't, because Luca's hand squeezed mine that night, whispering, "She just wants the best for you." And I wanted peace. Meanwhile, my parents, quiet, hardworking immigrants who'd built their lives cleaning offices and fixing cars, were treated like an inconvenience. When they came over for dinner, Livia's smile was stretched tight. Arturo checked his watch. Bianca whispered loud enough for me to hear, "Do they always eat like that?" My parents noticed, of course, but they never complained. My father would just pat my hand under the table and murmur, "We're proud of you, Mija. Don't worry about us." I did worry, but I swallowed it because I thought enduring a little humiliation was the price of keeping the peace. Years passed. The little humiliations grew teeth. If I decorated for Christmas, Arturo replaced the tree with a bigger one fit for the neighborhood. If I cooked dinner, Livia brought in a caterer because we deserve a break. If my parents sat on the sofa, Bianca sighed and sprawled across it, forcing them onto the dining chairs. Luca never defended me. Not once. He always said, "It's not worth the fight. Let it go." But I was the one letting go. Of respect, of boundaries, of my own home. The breaking point should have been sooner. It should have been the day I came home to find Arturo in the garage, throwing out boxes of my father's tools because they were rusty junk. Tools my dad had saved from his janitorial job, tools that had fixed everything in our childhood apartment when money was tight. I remember snatching them back, my voice rising for the first time. "These are not yours to touch." Arturo chuckled. "Everything here is mine to touch." And Luca, my husband, looked away. That should have been the night I left. But I didn't. Because I believed in vows. Because I thought marriage meant compromise. Because I told myself that if I kept trying, if I kept bending, one day they'd stop pushing. Instead, they pushed harder. And finally, the day came when they pushed my parents out into the cold. Literally. Changed the locks. Threw a party. Left two elderly people to freeze on my porch while they toasted under my chandelier. That was the day I stopped being quiet. That was the day I began plotting my revenge. The night they locked my parents out wasn't an accident. It was a declaration. 2 days earlier, I came home from work to find Arturo in the foyer with a locksmith. "Security upgrade," he said casually, jingling a new set of keys. "Neighborhood's getting rough. We can't risk it." We. As though he signed the mortgage. As though my parents, who visited weekly, didn't matter. I asked for my set of keys. He patted my cheek like I was a child and said, "Livia has them." When I confronted Luca later, he avoided my eyes. "It's just temporary, Maya. Don't make it a fight." I remember standing in my own kitchen, feeling like the ground was tilting beneath me. My husband had surrendered my authority without asking, and my in-laws had claimed ownership of walls I scrubbed, floors I mopped, bills I paid. That Friday, I had a late dental appointment. My parents came by to wait for me so we could share dinner. They brought caldo de pollo, still steaming in the pot, their way of reminding me I was still their daughter, not just a pawn in my husband's family game. But when they arrived, the locks had already been changed. The party was in full swing. Music thundered through the walls. Strangers' cars lined the driveway. My mother knocked, then rang the bell, then called my phone. But I was in the dentist's chair, mouth full of cotton, unable to answer. Inside, they heard voices, laughter, glasses clinking. But no one opened the door. They waited and waited. The temperature dropped fast, below freezing. My father's hands shook so badly, he dropped his gloves. My mother tried to warm him with her coat, but the wind sliced through everything. By the time I pulled into the driveway, their lips were blue. Their eyes held something I'd never seen before: shame. When the paramedics rushed my father into the ambulance, I followed close behind, fury crackling through every nerve. At the hospital, they said, mild hypothermia. A few more hours, and it could have been far worse. My father lay there under warm blankets, and 4 dripping, skin pale as parchment. My mother sat at his side, holding his hand, tears streaking her cheeks.
And me?
I paced the corridor like a caged animal. When Luca finally arrived, reeking faintly of gin, I nearly lunged at him. Do you know where I found them? I hissed. On the porch. In the cold. Locked out of their daughter's home. He rubbed his temples. Maya, calm down. You're overreacting. Overreacting. My voice echoed down the hall, sharp enough to turn heads. My father could have died tonight, because your parents decided my family doesn't belong. He winced, glancing around. Keep your voice down. You'll embarrass us. Embarrass us? I took a step closer, my hands trembling. You embarrassed me the day you handed them my house. The next morning, I returned home. The house smelled like stale wine and spilled perfume. Champagne flutes still littered the counter. Glitter clung to the carpet like ash after a fire. And there they were, Arturo and Livia, lounging in my living room, sipping coffee from my wedding china. Livia looked up, her expression smooth.
Maya.
We didn't expect you so early. Early.
My voice was ice.
It's my house. I don't need an invitation. Arturo chuckled, setting down his cup with a deliberate clink. That's debatable. You weren't here last night, and someone had to host. We took care of things. Things? I snapped. You mean throwing my parents out into the cold? Livia's smile didn't waver. They should have called first. You know how crowded events can get. Events? My laugh came out hollow. My father is in the hospital, but I suppose that's just an inconvenience to you. Bianca wandered in, still in last night's sequin dress, yawning. God, Maya, don't be so dramatic. It was just one night. Something inside me shifted then. I realized no apology was coming. No guilt, no regret. They had crossed a line and they enjoyed it. I looked at each of them, one by one. Then I smiled. Not the smile of someone defeated. The smile of someone planning. You're right, I said softly. It was just one night. They exchanged glances, smug, thinking they'd silence me. But what they didn't know was that one night was all it took. One night to transform me from their victim into their worst nightmare. The hospital corridors smelled of disinfectant and coffee gone bitter. Machines beeped softly from nearby rooms, each tone reminding me of the fragility of breath, of life. My father dozed under layers of warmed blankets, his skin still pale, his chest rising shallow but steady. My mother sat by his side, her rosary twisted tight in her fingers. She looked up when I entered, her eyes red but fierce. Don't fight with them anymore, Mija, she whispered. It isn't worth your health. But her voice cracked, betraying the anger she tried to suppress. I kissed her forehead. It is worth it. They nearly killed him. She shook her head slowly, murmuring, family shouldn't fight family. I turned away, unable to answer. Because what do you call people who lock your parents out to freeze, family, or enemies living under your roof? Later that evening, Luca walked in, suit jacket slung over one shoulder like he was the one who had suffered a sleepless night. He carried a coffee cup in his hand, eyes bloodshot but not from tears. Maya, he said softly, placing a hand on my arm. I've spoken with my parents. They didn't mean any harm. They thought it was just a security precaution. I stared at him, my voice flat. A security precaution? Throwing my parents into the cold. They didn't throw them out, he said quickly. They just miscommunicated. I laughed, but it wasn't joy. It was disbelief, a miscommunication that nearly killed my father. He glanced around at the nurses, embarrassed by my tone. "Keep your voice down. You're making a scene." That was when I realized my husband wasn't ashamed of what they'd done.
He was ashamed that I was speaking about it out loud.
I pulled my arm free. If you can't see the difference between an accident and an attack, then you're already lost to them. For 2 days, I balanced my life between the hospital and my home, a home that no longer felt like mine. Each time I stepped inside, I found new evidence of invasion. Livia's coats hung in my closet. Arturo's slippers lined the entryway. Bianca's perfume poisoned the air upstairs. It wasn't my house anymore. It was their trophy. On the third night, I caught Bianca parading through the hallway with my jewelry box in her hands. "What are you doing?" I snapped. She looked up, startled, then smirked. "Relax. I was just borrowing earrings for tonight's dinner." "Borrowing? Without asking?" "You weren't home," she said simply, snapping the lid shut. "Besides, everything here is family property now." Family property. The words seared into me like acid. That night, after Bianca left for her dinner, I sat in my bedroom, though it felt like a stranger's hotel room now, staring at the wall until the silence roared in my ears. It was clear. Luca wouldn't defend me. My in-laws wouldn't stop. And my parents would continue to suffer as long as I tolerated it. I thought of my father's lips turning blue, of my mother pressing her fragile hands against the locked door, of their shame. And something hardened inside me. I wouldn't beg anymore. I wouldn't argue anymore. I would take everything back. The next morning, I met with an attorney. His office smelled of leather and old paper, the air humming with the quiet power of legal recourse. After I laid out everything, the locks, the party, my parents' suffering, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Do you have proof?" he asked. "I have hospital records," I said. "I have text messages where they admitted changing the locks. And I can get statements from neighbors who saw my parents outside." He nodded slowly. "That's enough to start. We can file for an emergency injunction. If the deed is solely in your name, you can have them legally removed." Hearing it legally removed lit a spark in me. Not just revenge, justice. But I didn't stop there. I began documenting everything. Photos of their cars in my driveway, receipts they left on counters, party invitations with my address printed boldly across them. Every violation went into a folder I labeled The Reckoning. When Luca asked why I was suddenly spending so much time organizing files, I smiled sweetly and said, "Just trying to get my life back in order."
And he believed me.
Meanwhile, I kept visiting my father at the hospital. Each time, I looked into his weary eyes and silently promised him, "I will fix this. I will protect you the way you always protected me." One evening, as I adjusted his blanket, he squeezed my hand weakly. "Maya," he whispered, "don't let them break you." I bent down, kissed his forehead, and whispered back, "They've already broken enough. Now it's my turn." The plan was simple. Wait for the next party. Because if they wanted to humiliate me in my own home, I would return the favor, with an audience. I imagined it already. The glittering crowd, the smug laughter, Livia's diamonds flashing under my chandeliers. And then the knock at the door, the police, the legal documents, the look on their faces when they realized the house they paraded around as theirs wasn't theirs at all. The same humiliation they inflicted on my parents would be theirs, magnified, permanent. And this time, there would be no escape. The night of their next party arrived faster than I expected. I knew because Livia herself bragged about it, her voice dripping with self-satisfaction as she told neighbors they'd be hosting an exclusive gathering at her house. Not even Luca's.
Hers.
That was the final insult. I dressed carefully that evening. Not in mourning, not in surrender. In armor, a navy suit sharp enough to cut, heels that clicked like a metronome of war. In my bag, the folder labeled The Reckoning, thick with documents, receipts, photos, and the injunction signed by the judge that morning. When I pulled into the driveway, the house was lit like a palace. Cars lined the curb, Guests in gowns and tuxedos filed in through my front door. I could already hear the music, see silhouettes twirling past the curtains. But tonight, I wouldn't be the woman standing outside, locked away from warmth.
Tonight I was the storm.
At exactly 9 o'clock, I walked up the steps. The same porch where my father nearly froze. The same door that had been locked against me. I pressed the doorbell. The music dimmed, voices hushed. A moment later, the door swung open, and there was Bianca, draped in sequins again, glass of champagne in hand. She blinked at me and smirked.
Oh,
"Maya, you're not on the guest list." I smiled back.
no.
"I'm the homeowner. Move." Her smirk faltered. Behind her, heads turned. Livia appeared, diamonds blazing, Arturo looming beside her with his booming laugh. But when they saw me, the laughter died. "Maya," Livia purred, stepping forward as if she could smooth this away. "You've chosen a poor time to make a scene." I tilted my head.
No.
"I've chosen the perfect time." I lifted my hand and snapped my fingers. 2 uniformed officers stepped onto the porch behind me. Gasps rippled through the crowd. By court order, one officer announced, unfolding a paper, "All non-owners are required to vacate this property immediately." Arturo's face turned purple. "This is my house." "Actually," I cut in, pulling the deed from my folder and holding it high, my voice carrying clear and strong. "It's mine. Purchased in my name. Paid for with my work. Every single stone. Every single nail. You contributed nothing but entitlement." I took a step closer, my eyes locked on theirs. "And tonight, the charade ends." The guests murmured, shifting uncomfortably, their eyes darting between the officers and my in-laws. Livia's smile cracked for the first time. "Darling, this isn't necessary. We were only trying to..." "To what?" I snapped. "To host strangers in my home while my parents froze outside? To strip me of dignity in the house I bled for?"
No, Livia.
"This isn't hospitality. This is theft. And tonight, the thieves are being evicted." Arturo tried to bluster, stepping forward, but the officer blocked him with a raised hand. "Sir, failure to comply will result in charges." Bianca's champagne flute slipped from her hand, shattering on the hardwood. The sound echoed like a gavel. The guests began leaving in a flurry of whispers, clutches pulled tight, tuxedo collars tugged nervously. No one wanted to be caught in someone else's scandal. Within minutes, the glittering party dissolved into chaos. Livia pleaded, her perfect voice wobbling. Arturo roared about injustice. Bianca cursed under her breath. But the officers didn't flinch. One by one, they escorted them out, onto the porch, into the cold. And for the first time, they felt what my parents had felt. Locked out. Unwanted. Powerless. Luca appeared at last, shirt half-buttoned, face pale. "Maya," he whispered, almost broken. "Why are you doing this?"
Why?
I held his gaze, steady and sharp. "Because when they locked my parents out, you stood by. Because when I begged for respect, you looked away. Because every time I cried for help, you told me to stay quiet." He reached for me, desperate. "We can fix this." I stepped back.
No, Luca.
"You broke this. And now I'm fixing it." The officer handed him the same order. "Sir, you'll also need to leave. You're not listed as owner." He froze, staring at the paper like it had gutted him. For once, his charm, his persuasion, useless. He followed his parents into the night. When the last car pulled away, silence filled the house. No music, no laughter, just my footsteps on hardwood, echoing in the home that was mine again. I walked through each room, touching walls, picking up remnants of the party. A half-eaten canopy, an overturned glass, a sequin on the floor. Trash, all of it. But the house itself, it still breathed. Still mine. Still standing. And so was I. That night, after the last door slammed behind them, the house felt different. The same walls, the same furniture, the same windows, but the air was lighter. For months, it had carried their perfume, their cologne, their voices, their mockery. Now, The silence belonged to me. I locked the door myself. The sound of the bolt sliding into place was the sweetest song I'd ever heard. The next morning, I returned to the hospital with a smile my parents hadn't seen in weeks. My father was sitting up, color slowly returning to his face. My mother fussed with his blanket, the way she always did, though her eyes looked tired. "You look different," she said softly, narrowing her gaze at me. "I feel different," I replied, and I told them everything. The police, the eviction, the look on Arturo's face when the deed was waved in front of him, the stunned silence of Livia's friends as they scurried away, the moment Bianca dropped her champagne like it was my gavel striking down. My father's lips trembled, not from the cold this time, but from laughter. He wheezed until his eyes watered. "That's my girl," he whispered. My mother shook her head, torn between shock and pride. "You did all that?" I leaned forward, taking their hands in mine. "They locked you out. But I locked them out for good. This house will never belong to anyone but us again." 2 weeks later, my father came home. Not to his old apartment. Not to the hospital. To my house. This time, I had new locks installed by my choice under my supervision. Only 2 keys existed. One for me, one for my parents. No spares for family. No excuses about security. When I opened the door and led them in, my mother gasped. I'd scrubbed away the last traces of the party, repainted the foyer, lit candles that smelled like cinnamon and pine. "Welcome home," I told them. Tears spilled down my mother's cheeks. My father's hands trembled as he touched the wall. "It feels different," he said. "It is," I answered. Luca tried calling. Dozens of times. At first, he left messages, apologies, excuses, promises to make his parents see reason. Then came the guilt trips. "We can work this out, Maya. Don't throw everything away." I blocked his number, because what he never understood was that he had already thrown everything away. The night he chose their comfort over my parents' lives, the marriage ended. He just didn't know it yet. The divorce papers went out 2 weeks later. And for once, I didn't feel sadness. I felt clean. In the months that followed, I poured myself into repairing what they'd tried to break. I replaced furniture, painted walls, planted roses outside the porch where my parents had once shivered in the cold. Each brushstroke, each nail hammered, each flower planted was an act of defiance, a declaration. This is mine.
Ours.
I set up a small study for my father, stocked with books and warm lamps, a sunny sewing corner for my mother, and a dining table where we ate meals without tension, without cruelty, without diamonds flashing disapproval from across the room. One night, as we ate caldo de pollo together, my father put down his spoon and looked at me. "You saved us," he said quietly. I shook my head.
No.
"I just saved the house." But my mother reached across, touching my hand.
No, Mija.
"You saved us from years more of being treated as less. From being invisible in your own home. That is bigger than any house." Her words settled deep in me. For so long, I had thought revenge meant humiliation, making them feel what we had felt. But the true revenge was this: peace. Peace they could never buy, never steal, never tarnish. Months later, I heard whispers that Arturo and Livia had been shunned by their social circle. Guests from that night spread the story like wildfire. The lavish party cut short by police, the homeowners thrown into the cold, the daughter-in-law who stood her ground. They lost more than my house. They lost their reputation, their mask of control. And I didn't lift a finger. They destroyed themselves. Now, when I turn the key in my lock, I smile, because I know what it costs to win back that sound. And every night, as my parents sit warm by the fire, I remember the icy porch, the shame in their eyes, the cruel laughter spilling from behind my own windows. And I whisper to myself, never again. They locked my parents out in the cold, so I locked them out of my life forever.